Now,
We'll start slow so let the viewers come in. Welcome everybody to the last Americans for Legal Reform meeting for the season. This year, this is actually our first live one this year because of the COVID, the library. Hopefully when we go back after the summer, we're going to go back to the library again. Although the Tiki Bar is pretty good too, so maybe we'll stick with that. We have a couple announcements before we have our speaker, and I'm going to let everybody start tuning in. We also have some more people showing up. So if you're watching this on Facebook or wherever you're watching it, you can share it. So we'll, because everybody's going to want to hear our speaker tonight. We saved the best for last. We are going to have, Carl and I decided last week that we're going to have our Americans for Legal Reform annual barbecue again this year. We skipped it last year, but every year it's been getting bigger and bigger. In 2000, I guess that would be 19 was the last one then, right? 2019, we had just shy of 300 people came to the barbecue. So we're trying to do a yard expansion so we can have room for everybody. But we are going to announce the date, so check out the website, and I'm sure everybody's looking to get out. So there's going to be a big crowd. Before we get to our speaker again, we have some news that we wanted to share. Not good news, unfortunately. But one of our board members, Carl Ross, many of you know, he was actually very active in Americans for Legal Reform, but he was a behind the scenes guy. But he was very, very active. Any of you who came to us and really needed help probably met with him in his offices in Bayshore, and it's just a real loss for everybody. Carl, you want to say some things?
Well, it was my brother in solidarity. We spoke every day about legal reform. I don't speak to my wife as much as I speak to him. And we will miss him. It was a great guidance. What do we do? How do we do this? And we'll miss him greatly, that's for sure. Also, if I could go and mention Monty Weinstein, who is an advocate for legal reform. Many years. We had Monty speak at a meeting, I guess about a year and a half ago, and it was the most people we ever had at a meeting. So we're going to miss Monty also. God bless both of them. And you want to talk about Phil a little bit?
Yeah. So just going back to Carl, as Carl said, Carl and I, we come from a different perspective because we both had really bad, high conflict divorces. We had crazy ex-wives, and we went through the ringer in court. So we come in with a different perspective. Carl Ross came in with a different perspective because he had 2 divorces and never had a bad divorce. Had great relationships with his ex-father-in-law. In fact, he was a business partner with him. Had his second ex-wife would come to the parties with him. And so Carl came in with a different perspective that perhaps Carl and myself and maybe Ed, some of the other board members didn't have. So we really looked for him for guidance. He was also, very philanthropic, and he's one of these guys that you never expect was going to die, because although he was 86 years old, he was healthy, and he sort of had this way about him that, as his son said, he had us all convinced that he was going to be here forever. None of us thought our time was limited with Carl, because he went out to dinner, went to meetings, went to work every day. He was sharp. In fact, a couple of years, just to give you one quick story, everybody knows the saying, give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. Teach him how to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. And that was really, I think, what Carl Ross believed in. So when I was doing my business, and I was struggling through the business, doing Americans for Legal Reform, and both Carls came to me and said, listen, if you don't make money, you can't help anybody. So you got to focus on making money first. So then that's how you're going to be able to sustain yourself and help people. Being broke, you're no good, because we all know it takes money in the judicial system. So they both gave me guidance in my business. But about 2 years ago, they both called me in and they said, Gary, basically your website sucks. You need a new website. And these are 2 people in their 80s telling me my website sucks. So it's bad. And I said, all right, but it's very expensive to do a website. They said, well, we're going to chip in. We're going to pay for the website. And that's like they wanted to build the business. But I didn't know that much about it, and neither did they. But Carl Ross had his son and his grandson go on the internet, print out all the information about different hosts and servers and websites. And by the time we came to the meeting, he knew more about the website and internet than just about anybody. And this is a man who didn't even do emails. So just to show you, he's a smart guy and did his research. And like Carl said, he'll really be missed. At the barbecues, you may have seen him. He would sit here with his girlfriend, Kristen, and he was in the background, but he was very generous. And I got to throw one more story. We had Carlos Rivera was here, and when he was in court, and his ex-wife was trying to incarcerate him again for money for the second time, and she was hell-bent on doing it. And Carl Ross came forward with Carl Lanzazera and said, "We'll pay money, a lot of money, really a lot, more money than a lot of people make in a year," and offered to pay it, not a loan, to pay his ex-wife. And so the only thing we want out of it is we want her to stop trying to put him in jail. And the way Carl Ross said, the way I look at it is we're buying a guy's life back. And the judge said, no, give her the money, but she can still try to put him in jail in 6 months. And Carl refused to do it. He said, I'm not giving money as ransom. I'm giving money so this man can get his life back. And I don't know what he would have paid, but it was just a lot of money that he was willing to pay, in the $50,000 range that he was willing to put up with Carl Lanzazera just to keep a man out of jail. That's the kind of person. He's not family. He doesn't owe anything to him. He just did it because he wanted to save a life and do the right thing. So, again, our thoughts are with the Ross family at this time. And then, as Carl also mentioned, the same week, Dr. Monty Weinstein passed away, who was a pioneer in family rights. He started the Fathers' Rights movement. He wasn't really just a fathers' rights advocate, but when he started 30 years ago, really only fathers were getting screwed. It has since evolved to where he was in any family that was estranged. And in fact, Carlos mentored with him a few times on some mothers also. So, but he's known for his father's rights. But this man got arrested. He would proudly tell us how he would burn effigies of judges in front of their houses and go to jail. This guy wasn't afraid of anything. In the courtroom, he'd speak up to the judge. In fact, Monty's wife is a judge in Brooklyn. And one of the cases he was working on with us, he was screaming at the judge. He's so passionate about parents having access to their children that the judge said, Dr. Weinstein, would you let anybody talk to your wife like that? He said, my wife would never do what you're doing, so nobody would ever do it. This man had no fear in court. He was comfortable and he was fighting back. And Carlos and I were at his funeral this week, and we learned, so many things that he never even told us, because he was the kind of guy who would always talk about everybody else. When we were with Carlos, I don't think you could be with him for 2 seconds without him telling everybody that Carlos is a board-certified pediatrician, But he didn't talk about all his own accomplishments. In fact, he was at the Nuremberg trials. He was involved in being a Nazi hunter. He was one of the first people to cross the Berlin Wall. He was a big advocate for the state of Israel, the formation. So he has a lot of things besides his family advocacy work. And I think his work will go down in all the families that he's touched in his career, and the work and the precedent that he set. So he was really an inspiration for all of us, and he's going to be missed. And then I'm going to get one more sad thing out of the way, and then we're going to move on to the better things tonight. But also, many of you know one of our ALR members, Phil Antonucci. He's also one of the cameramen for Long Island Backstory. He's at all of our events. And if any of you know Phil, this is the kindest guy. I don't know, looking around here, I won't point fingers, but there's very few of us who could probably say that we don't have any enemies in the world and that we don't hate anybody. Personally, most of us probably hate the judge that screwed us in our court. But Phil literally doesn't have an enemy in the world, doesn't hate anybody, never said a bad word about anybody, and is always there to volunteer, whether it's when I ran for office, Americans for Legal Reform, setting up, tearing down, doing a Long Island Backstory, and he's always been there for us. And unfortunately, Phil came down with leukemia, and unfortunately it got a little bit out of control, and he's in the hospital right now in the ICU. So at the end, or if during the thing, if anybody wants, and Phil, if you want to send a short message to me on a text, or you can come up to me at the end, and I'll do like a 10-15 second video. Andy Hersman is going to make a collage of all the get well wishes, and we're going to send that to him in the hospital, and at least his family can play it, because of course with COVID he can't really get the visitors. right now. So I think it would be nice for him to hear that so many of us are looking out for Phil. So keep Phil in your prayers if you believe in that. If not, just send good thoughts his way, because this is really, you know, a great guy. All right, so now on to a more serious note. A couple things before we start. So we got the barbecue. I want to introduce quickly a candidate who's running. As many of you know, we're a 401(c). What are we? 501(c), something with a C on the end. But we're a nonprofit, tax deductible. So being that we cannot endorse any political candidates. But what we do is any candidate who's got the balls to come speak in front of our tough crowd, we do give them the opportunity to come and introduce themselves. And we've had Democrats, conservatives, and Republicans come and let them speak. But I always say, without endorsing them, that if anybody's willing to come and speak to our group, we could be a tough crowd, right? You know, we're pretty set in our ways. Almost everybody here. Well, everybody here is against corruption, right? You know, we like the outsiders coming in. And if you're willing to come and speak to our group, we should give you our attention. And so I'm going to introduce Stephen Becker, who's running for county legislator in the 16th? 17th district. He'll tell you where that is. And then he's going to stick around after our presentation. And if you'd like to come up and introduce yourself, he's got some cards he can give out. And if you want to get involved in his campaign. But listen, the only way we're going to change things really is through politics. And as many as you know, we've been disappointed many times with politicians because it's the same ones that are always cross-endorsed. They have the money, the political power. They get in, and they don't really do anything because they owe everybody, with the exception of a few people like Legislator Trotta, who doesn't owe anybody, right? And that's why he's been a big part of Americans for Legal Reform. When we need help, no matter where anybody lives on Long Island, Carl and I pick up the phone. I think you remember we called him, I think at 9:30 one night at home because we had somebody who needed help outside his area. And he took the call because he doesn't know anybody. So he's one of the good guys. And again, so Stephen's here to speak, and I'll let him tell you a little bit about his platform, and you can meet him at the end. And if you'd like to get involved, that's the way to make change. If you're not going to run yourself, you got to give money, right? Because that's what makes these people win. And or if you don't have the money, you give them your support by going to their meetings, by knocking on doors with them, handing out pamphlets. But you got to get our people in. So with that, I'm going to introduce Stephen Becker.
Thank you very much, Gary.
Do you need this to read off of it? You know
That's quite all right. I think I know a little bit. Thank you, Gary. And thank you, everyone, for this opportunity. My name is Stephen Becker. I'm running for County Legislator in District 17 in Suffolk County. That encompasses Huntington, South Huntington, Melville, Dix Hills, Deer Park, and North Babylon. Bits and pieces of each. So if you live anywhere near there, come to me after this. I'll be happy to tell you whether or not you are in my district. That being said, it's my first time running for politics. I am not a politician. I sell air conditioners. That's what I do. But I'm a dad that lives in Dix Hills. I've got an 11-year-old boy, a 9-year-old girl, and I looked at what's going on with Long Island, and I've had enough. I've had enough. Long Island is not livable. Long Island is corrupt. And everybody says, get involved, do something. Well, I decided to do something. I didn't have to do this, but I want to do this. I look at my son, and I worry about what kind of Long Island we're leaving him. And believe me, like any Republican, I've thought about leaving Long Island and going to Texas, going to Florida. But you know what? It's going to follow us there. We can run now, but 20 years from now, it's going to be there too. So myself personally, I'm going to hold the line in Suffolk County. We are very close to making Suffolk County red. There's 18 legislators. 10 of them are Democrat, 8 are Republican. When I flip the 17th Republican, it's 9-9, and tie goes to the county clerk, who's a Republican. This is an off-year election. This is decided by several hundred votes. We are just a couple hundred votes from making Suffolk red. So I need support. I do need help, as Gary is kind enough to mention. We need time. We need money. These are expensive campaigns. There was one of my colleagues in the Republican Party. Last election, his opponent raised over $1 million for county legislature, and they lost. Okay, which is a good thing. But my policy is to fiscally fix first Long Island. We are in a horrible spiral. Every year, New York State ranks every single county in terms of their financial strength, their fiscal strength. 3 years in a row, we rank 62 out of 62. For 7 years, all the ratings agencies have been dropping our bond status. We used to be A+, AAA. We are 5 years away on the track we're at from being junk bond status. When we go junk bond, our taxes go through the roof. That's just the start. I don't want to take up more of your time. I do appreciate you guys. I appreciate what everybody's doing here. I'm here to learn from you as well. So please, I'm going to stick around. Come up to me afterwards. I want to hear from you. Thank you very much, everyone.
So now I'm going to introduce our guest. Now that we got some people all starting to go in on Facebook, and so we got a nice crowd tonight. I know a lot of people didn't want to come out for two reasons. Number one, they're still worried about the the COVID, but we thought outside it would be safe. We can spread out a little bit. A lot of us are vaccinated, some aren't, but we're spread out outside. And then the other reason is because our lovely founder had a senior moment and sent an email to everybody telling them it was virtual by mistake. So there were some people who were texting the last minute. They said, "Oh, I'm just watching online." But we still got a nice crowd here, and we wanted to end the year, as I said, with a bang. So I want to introduce our next guest, who's a very good friend of mine, of Carl's, of Frank's, of Carlos, a good friend of all of us. We've gotten to know him well. His name is Jeff Deskovic. Some of you may have heard his story. I first actually heard his story at one of our Americans for Legal Reform meetings. I don't even know how many years ago was that, 7, 8, 10 years? Well, you weren't even in law school then, so a long time ago. And I heard the story, and I said, you know what? This guy, first of all, he just needs a friend, because he spent 16 years in prison for a rape and a murder that he didn't commit. And I said, you know what? The least I could do is befriend this guy. But I really didn't know him. I just thought he had an interesting story. And I say story, but this is his life. But after that, I got to know Jeff, and he's such an amazing person. Anybody, you could read his story online, and God knows how many shows, national shows he's been on, and you could see that Jeff got a financial settlement that would have allowed him to take the money and even probably could afford to live in Suffolk County the rest of his life. That's what he had. But seriously, Jeff could have taken his money. He's not an extravagant lifestyle, and he could live comfortably and just go into the sunset. But what he decided to do was to help other people, and that's probably why we all became such good friends, because that's what we do, right? We all of us that are here today want to not only help better ourselves, but help other people. If you didn't, you could just sit home and watch this on video. So everybody here is a helper, right? And that's why we get along with Jeff. So what he did was, he realized the way he could change things was to become a lawyer himself. And he could try to get people out that were wrongfully convicted as well. I mean, and just think of that. I mean, I can't even imagine going back to school, in my 30s, to law school, nonetheless. I mean, something so difficult. And Jeff was determined, and he went, got his undergraduate degree, and then moved on to law school, graduated law school. Everybody, knew him, so the sights were on him. And, there's a lot of pressure on Jeff, I think, to do it. And although we did see that you had the pressure in your face towards the end there. But that's a lot of pressure on this man, because everybody's looking. And if he failed, everybody would look. No, everybody else fails out. Okay, it happens. But everybody was looking at Jeff, and he worked his ass off. We hardly saw him for those couple years when he was in law school, because he was constantly studying, and Jeff's very intense. So when he was studying, he didn't want to do anything else, and he ended up graduating, becoming a lawyer, passed the bars. Just an amazing feat. And now he just wants to help people and try to exonerate people. And in fact, he was just on his first case where he's actually on as co-counsel for, I don't know if we'll tell the story later, but for somebody who's, again, he believes wrongfully convicted, but he was just trying to get the man's day in court. And I think that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. I'll let Jeff take it. But one of the things of this issue was the COVID. And when Jeff called me and I said, well, Jeff, did the guy do it? And he said, well, I don't believe he did, but right now, all I'm asking, the court ordered that he's entitled to have an evidentiary hearing and get in court. But because of COVID, he can't get into court. He's been sitting in prison for another year. And just think, if this guy is like Jeff and an innocent man, and he's sitting in prison, he could get killed, he could get COVID in jail. Everybody's worried about COVID. It's spreading rampant in jail. Imagine the guilt of a man that can die in prison, and they could end up that he's wrongfully convicted. And Jeff was so passionate, he called up and he asked if we could get some people together. And anybody know on Long Island, we don't like the Bronx. We're scared of the Bronx, right? So he asked us to go to the Bronx for him, and he said, of course, Jeff asked. Carl, myself, and Don Caulfield went to the Bronx. He got a very nice turnout of people. We had signs, and you know he advocated to get a hearing for this guy. And the first thing that came to my mind was, I think it's funny that they can't give this guy a hearing because of COVID, right? But the grocery stores are open, Walmart's open. You know, all restaurants can be open at 20%. And if you take somebody to court for money, for child support, wow, all of a sudden Corona must not appear when it comes to money, because they get those hearings right away. They figure out how to do it, right? But when a guy is possibly in prison wrongfully for a year, the guy can't get his day in court. It's just, I mean, how sick is it that these judges feel that they're above all of us? Which, first of all, they're sitting up on a bench far away from everybody. They could be surrounded by plastic. One of the freak judges out here, Judge Leo, sits up on his bench with his plastic thing, a shield on his face, and a face mask on, yelling at everybody from 20 feet away, and only allowing one person in the court, right? Okay, that freak can do it. They can hear this guy's case. What's more important than a guy who's possibly in prison wrongfully? No, I can't think of anything, right? So Jeff, and he was so passionate about asking. He doesn't like asking for favors, but he really did ask to come. So I want to have him talk a little bit about how COVID's affected, tell about his story. And I think I would like to know a little bit different if his perspective has changed now that he's an attorney. Because a lot of people say they're going to become an attorney, right? They're going to help people. And what happens? They become an attorney, and maybe the first couple people, they're all right. And then you're surrounded by this swamp, like politics. And many attorneys,
molded.
I don't want to think of the right word, but they don't become what they went into it for. You know, they become part of this whole system, and I think sometimes we've spoken to them. They don't see it. They can't see that they become the system. They truly believe that they're doing the right thing. Where all of us like, what the hell are you talking about? You're not doing the right thing. You know, you're taking people's houses because they're getting divorced. You know, legal fees. That, I mean, we just had it with an attorney. Two people, they try to take their house because they're getting divorced. That is not ethical. You know, nobody should lose their home to their attorney for getting a divorce. Anyway, I'm going off on I don't want to take too much of Jeff's time, but since we're not going to get kicked out because it's my backyard, I figured it's okay. So with that, I'm going to welcome Jeff Deskovic, and thank you for coming out.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, everybody.
I needed the energy. Yeah, it's great. It's great to just be free, man. It's great to just stand outside at night. There's no one to force you to go inside. You can feel the fresh air on your face. You know, you can be amongst friendly crowd, a great bunch of people. There's no violence going on. Okay, there's no officers. You know, there's no passes. There's just freedom and tranquility, and I feel that. You know, I feel that right here. You know, I'm looking at, you know, the nature and the trees and the sky. You know, and I'm just taking it all in and, you know, appreciating each second and kind of listening to myself as I speak right now. You know, because it is kind of surreal just when I think about just the life journey, you know, that I had and how far away anything like this was, even just a thought in my head. Just a short 14 years ago when I was, you know, in Sing Sing Correctional Facility. You know, it's a maximum security prison in the town of Ossining, Westchester County, and I'm in year 16. I'm in year 16 of a 15 to life sentence. I've been in prison from age 17 to 32 because I was arrested when I was 16 years old in Westchester County for murder and rape, which I did not commit. And so my presentation here tonight, I'm going to share a little bit about my story, and that's going to be a little bit about my case and, you know, how I came to be exonerated, and I'll talk a little bit about, you know, the journey from there to becoming an advocate and a few of the things I've done along the way. And, you know, then I'll pivot, I'll switch gears, and I'm going to talk about, you know, just some what I think is really some common sense criminal justice reform measures. I'm going to give bill numbers, and I'm going to hope that everybody here legislators can contact your legislators of either political party, trying to get some support for those measures, because there is a lot of injustice afoot, no shortage of that. And it's wonderful when political issues, legislative issues get pushed into political campaigns, because what happens is that you further the issue, you further the awareness. Some people are really for things, you push the opponents the other way, so that no matter what happens, the issue gets furthered, whether or not the candidate of your choice, wins or not. And the real ones, my friends, are the people that, if they get elected, they go ahead and fulfill those campaign promises that they made, and the people who lose stay with you and continue the fight, to continue to walk the halls, of Albany, of the county legislators, of the local officials, of all the ones that are real, amongst those of us who win, and from those of us who lose. So the year is 1990. I'm in Westchester County. I'm 16 years old. I'm a high school student. It was ethnically diverse city of Peekskill, approximately 25,000 people. And I want to say it was middle class, at least it was as far as I knew. And a high school classmate of mine was found and murdered and raped. And there hadn't been a murder in Peekskill for maybe 20 years. And so this created an atmosphere of fear, rumor, paranoia. Parents were concerned with their own safety as well as the safety of their children. Parents were literally driving their kids up to the high school, dropping them off for school, coming back at around 2:30, bringing them straight home. I mean, the whole city basically shut down, and there were town hall meetings held, safety tips, progress on investigation were periodically given by police officials and the mayor. I got on the police radar, and I'm just doing the condensed version to do this balanced presentation rather than something in depth. But I got on the police radar because in high school I was quiet. I was to myself, and I didn't engage in a lot of organized sports. And so in the course of the police investigation, they interviewed a lot of students from the high school, and some of them told the police, "You might want to talk to Jeff." I guess the underlying thinking is people who are quiet, who don't quite fit in, they commit heinous crimes, right? So the police's line of reasoning went. Another thing that was kind of a reinforcing factor is this was really my first brush with death. I'm 16 years old, I'm a sensitive kid, and it struck an emotional chord with me, and I did have emotional reaction. But then again, so did everybody else in Peekskill, to the point that free mental health services were offered to anybody who wanted. And so to the police, my outward emotionalism was a sign of my being sorry for what I'd done. So the theory went. A reinforcing factor was they got a psychological profile from the NYPD, which purported to have the psychological characteristics of the actual perpetrator, and I had the misfortune of matching those psychological characteristics. So it was a type of reinforcement. For about 6 weeks, the police played this cat and mouse game with me. Half the time they would talk to me like I was a suspect, and when they would push too hard and I would become frightened and I want to get away from them, they then switched it up. And Jeff is this junior detective helper theme was what they pushed. Prior to being a teenager, the career I wanted to have when I grew up was actually to be a cop. So this unexpected early opportunity to do this quasi-police work, along with my age, which was 16, was how the police were able to pull the wool over my eyes as to the absurdity that a 16-year-old would be able to help in an active homicide investigation. Came from a single-parent household. My father was never involved in my life in any aspect, and that also intersected with the good cop, bad cop technique, where one officer pretends like he's my friend, but who's somehow powerless to intervene on the roughhouse tactics of his partner. So I began to look to the officer who was pretending to be my friend as a father figure. So eventually they got me to agree to take lie detector test, and I agreed to take the test. And the reason why they told me to take this test is they said, look, we can finally, talking to you like a suspect, that part of it, we can drop that, we can focus on really getting the actual perpetrator, and look, we got some new tip, and we want to share that with you, and you'll be more helpful to us once we do, but you got to pass this polygraph first. So the next day, rather than report to school, I went to the police station for this test. And so my mother and grandmother thought I was in the high school. They didn't call around looking for me. They had no idea of what was going on. So I was driven to town of Brewster in Putnam County, 40 minutes away by car. That meant I was not able to leave on my own anymore. I was totally dependent upon the police. I did not have an attorney present. I wasn't given anything to eat the entire time that I was there. They gave me a 4-page brochure which explained how the polygraph worked, but it had a lot of big words in it that I didn't understand. But then I figured, I'm here to help the police. What does it matter? Let's just get on with it. So from there they put me in this small room, and the polygraphist gave me countless cups of coffee, purpose of which was clearly to get me nervous. Then they attached me to this polygraph machine, and then this polygraphist, who by the way was a Putnam County Sheriff's investigator, and he was dressed like a civilian. He never identified himself as a police officer. He never read me my rights. And so he attaches me to this machine, and then he launches into his third-degree tactics. So he invaded my personal space. He raised his voice at me. He kept asking me the same questions over and over again, and he seemed to be getting more and more ferocious as time went on. As each hour passed, my fear increased in proportion to the time, and he kept that up for 6.5 to 7 hours. Towards the end of the interrogation, he said, "What do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the polygraph test result that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm it." And so that really shot my fear through the roof. And at that point, the officer who had been pretending to be my friend, he came in the room and told me that the other officers were going to harm me. He'd been holding them off, but he couldn't do so indefinitely, that I had to help myself. When he added that if I just did what they wanted, that I confess, they'd stop what they're doing, I could go home afterwards, I was not going to be arrested. Being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, I wasn't thinking about the long-term implications. I was just thinking about my safety in the moment. I was in fear of my life. The fact that I didn't know where I was and that nobody else knew where I was either loomed very large in my mind. I was overwhelmed emotionally and psychologically. And then there was this push-pull dynamic in play, because on the one hand, he's floated the idea of this threat, and on the other hand, he's thrown me this false life preserver by means of his false promise. And so I decided to make up a story based on the information which they had given me in the course of that interrogation. By the time everything was all said and done, I collapsed onto the floor in the fetal position. I was crying uncontrollably. Needless to say, I was arrested. I was charged with a murder and rape. Now, before I went to trial, the results of a DNA test came in from the FBI lab, which showed that semen found in the victim didn't match me. But instead of acknowledging they made a mistake, they continued to prosecute full speed ahead. The prosecutor got the medical examiner to come in court and commit perjury, commit fraud. So his story was, and he came up with this 6 months after doing the autopsy, only after the DNA didn't match me. He comes into court and he says that he remembered that he forgot to document medical evidence 6 months ago. Hundreds of autopsies later, his memory's got to be really sharp, right, to hear him say it. That he forgot to document medical evidence that he said showed that the victim had been promiscuous, which is what opened the door for the prosecutor to argue that it didn't matter that the DNA didn't come from me. That didn't mean I was innocent. There was yet another person that she must have slept with prior to my murdering and raping her. Taking it a step further, he mentions another youth by name that he claims had slept with the victim. But he never set the proper evidentiary foundation, so he never asked this other youth to give a DNA sample. He never even called him as a witness. He just simply made the unsupported argument to the jury. At the same time, my public defender, because I didn't have any money with which to hire anybody, essentially didn't defend me. He never interviewed or called as a witness my alibi. I was actually playing wiffle ball when the crime happened. He literally never asked this medical examiner a single question. He rarely met with me. When he did meet with me, I tried to explain to him that I was innocent and what happened in the interrogation room, and he was always shutting me up. One time he told me he didn't care if I was guilty or innocent.
Sweetheart.
When I hadn't decided if I was going to have a bench trial, which was decided by a judge, or a jury trial, which was an option in light of this coerced false confession, he came came to me one day and told me that the judge came to him off the record and told him to pick a jury because he doesn't want to be responsible for finding me not guilty. So my lawyer was supposed to put that on the record and ask the judge to recuse himself because that's a prejudicial statement. It suggests he's feeling public pressure, and it's not proper for him to limit my decision, except that my lawyer didn't put it on the record. My lawyer should have never represented me from the beginning because of a conflict of interest. This other youth that the prosecutor was falsely saying had slept with the victim was represented by another attorney at Westchester County Legal Aid. Not just any attorney, but specifically the attorney who was supposed to be supervising him on my case. And so that conflict prevented the defense from calling him as a witness. It prevented the defense from asking him to give a DNA sample. Lastly, with regards to the confession, my interrogation was not videotaped and it wasn't audio taped. It was just the cop's word for it. And as a result of that, when they came to court, they left out the threat and false promise from their testimony. So I wanted to take the stand and explain what happened, but my lawyer would not allow me to take the stand. He told me his personal one-loss record was significantly better when his clients did not testify compared to when they did. I guess that's true. Probably most of his clients had a record. That didn't apply to me. I'd never been arrested for anything. My lawyer at times argued to the jury that the confession never happened. At other times he argued that it did happen, but it was coerced. At still other times he argued that it was false. So by taking this scattershot approach, he had to have been standing there with basically no credibility at all by the time he was done with everything. Last thing I'll mention about the trial was that so the victim's clothing was entered into evidence, and one of those items was a bra. And the jury asked to see the bra, and we thought that was a bright spot for the defense because one of the statements they coerced out of me involved me saying that I ripped her bra off. So the jury asked to see the bra, and we thought that was important because some bras cannot be ripped off of a body. It's just not the way it's built. And so it was at that point that the judge informed everybody that the evidence had been left in the courtroom in the open over the weekend. Does anyone see where I'm about to go with this? And apparently the custodians thought that it was garbage, and so that it was thrown out. And he allowed a photograph in which he said that you can almost see the bra to substitute the actual bra. He completely refused to give a mistrial. And so the end result of everything was that I was found guilty. I couldn't believe my hearing. I thought, did I miss the word not? But I thought that guilty people were the only ones who were found guilty. When I went to the sentencing, I begged the judge to overturn the verdict because I was innocent. I referenced the DNA to support my contention. And the judge actually told me on the record, maybe you are innocent. I don't see how he couldn't see that because the DNA didn't match me. You might think that would, well, then again, this audience is sophisticated and you wouldn't think that, but most people would think that that would cause the judge to exercise his discretion and overturn the verdict, which he could have done through reversing any number of rulings he made against me in the course of the trial. But instead he took the easy way out, which was to give me a sentence of 15 to life. I want to share that since I had been charged as an adult, I was sentenced as an adult, and I was therefore sent to a men's maximum security prison. I thought the justice system got better as you went higher up. Let me share you what happened as the injustices continued. Went to the appellate division, the first court. My lawyer argued that I was innocent. This is a different lawyer now. My lawyer argues that there's legally insufficient evidence, that there's not guilt proven beyond a reasonable doubt, that the verdict's against the weight of the evidence. All those are really good arguments. My lawyer argued that my Fifth Amendment rights had been violated by the way the police interrogated me, even absent the threat and false promise from the record. The issue of the missing evidence was raised. Another issue was raised was that the judge crafted this backdoor rule by which he allowed the polygraphist to repeatedly tell the jury that I failed the polygraph, while at the same time banning my lawyer from asking him any questions as to how he formed that opinion. And then there was another 5 issues of law. So in total, 10 issues were raised, including that the judge was biased. So the appellate division wrote that I was not in custody, that I was free to come and go as I pleased, and therefore they ruled that the statements were voluntary. They wrote that there was overwhelming evidence of guilt, which is kind of a head scratcher because the DNA didn't match me. And they got rid of all the rest of my issues in one sentence. They wrote that they had looked at my remaining contentions and found them either to be without merit or else not preserved for review. They ruled against me 5-0. It was all downhill from there. My re-argument motion was denied in one word, denied. New York Court of Appeals declined to give me permission to appeal to them. Prior to my first appeal being decided, Janine Pirro, holding up the book, the only book in print that's critical of her, called The Janine Machine. I'm holding this up, and most of us know that she's a commentator on Fox News, this bastion of due process that was somehow missing when she was in office. So her office fought all of my appeals. They are the ones who argued that a negative DNA test result is no insulation to a guilty verdict. They're the ones who, when I wrote her office and I asked her, can I have further DNA testing, because there was another man, Terry Chalmers, who had been exonerated in Westchester in a rape case after 7 years. The DNA excluded him. She agreed to exonerate him, and in explaining her decision, she referenced the reliability of DNA, which is referred to as the gold standard of evidence. And so I wrote her, well, what about this old case in the file? My DNA doesn't match either. I'm also innocent, and I would like to have further DNA testing. And her office would not allow me to have further DNA testing. So I went to federal court. I filed a writ for habeas corpus, and because the court clerk gave my lawyer the wrong information pertaining to the filing procedure, my petition arrived 4 days too late, which then District Attorney Pirro, her office, argued that the court should simply rule I was late in view of that 4-day delay, and the court shouldn't even reach the merits of my case, and that's what the court did. So I was stuck fighting that procedural issue at that point. So I appealed that ruling to the Federal Court of Appeals, where one of the two judges hearing that challenge was soon-to-be United States Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. And so Judge Sotomayor and her colleague, Judge Rosemary Pooler, they upheld that ruling. And then I moved to re-argue the case in front of those same two judges, requesting that all the judges on the circuit hear the case and make a ruling. And the re-argument motion was denied. And of course, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to give me permission to appeal to them. And so that marked the end of all of my appeals. So by this point, I have 11 years in prison. And when your appeals are exhausted, the state doesn't give you a lawyer anymore because they figure you're not litigating. Only way back into court, once your appeals have been exhausted, you have to find some new evidence that the court didn't know of before, or else you have to have some kind of new change in the law that's going to apply retroactively to old cases. So I wrote letters for about 4 years, rarely getting responses other than the occasional no. Eventually, I did wind up with the assistance of the Innocence Project. So getting their representation was the first significant step out of 3. Second thing is District Attorney Pirro left office, and her successor allowed me to have the testing that Ms. Pirro would not. And the third thing is we got lucky that we took that crime scene DNA evidence and we entered it into the DNA data bank, and it matched the actual perpetrator, whose DNA was in that data bank, because left free while I was doing time for his crime, he struck again 3.5 years later. He killed a second victim who was a school teacher and had 2 children. So on September 22nd, 2006, the conviction was overturned and I was released. I reported back to court November 2nd, 2006, at which point all the charges against me were dismissed on actual innocence grounds. and I then had to do the best that I could to try to put my life back together again. It was really difficult doing that. I was released without anything, as it normally happens. You can file a lawsuit, but that took me 5 years before I got anything. So I lacked stability of housing. I bounced around from place to place. I was a couple of weeks away from a homeless shelter at one point. Mercy College, which gave me a scholarship to finish the bachelor's degree. So I got the GED and associates and another year towards the bachelor's while incarcerated prior to the funding being cut for prisoners, and so Mercy College allowed me to get a scholarship. They let me live on the college campus. There was a stigma. You were incarcerated wrongfully for 16 years, yes, but you were there for 16 years, so how much of that rubbed off on you? Is it safe to be alone someplace with you? So when it comes to personal relationships, yes, having been wrongfully in prison has been a significant challenge. Culture was different, technology was different, cell phones, GPS, the internet, all these things simply didn't exist. I had never before lived on my own. I hadn't had a driver's license. I never went shopping. I never wrote a check. I never had to balance a budget. So all of those things were definitely challenges for me. But I did keep going. I did start doing advocacy work. So for about 5 years, I was an individual advocate, and I was doing presentations around the country, and I became a columnist for a weekly newspaper. I decided to trade privacy for awareness, so I kept doing media interviews, and I was meeting with elected officials, asking them to pass different legislation. After about 5 years, I did receive some financial compensation, and I wanted to continue on with the advocacy work I was doing, but going to the next level and working to exonerate other people. So I used some of the money. I used 7 figures of the money to start the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, which I intended to be a legacy, something to far outlive me. You know, with the mission statement of exonerating the wrongfully convicted and pursuing the policy changes aimed at preventing what happened to me from happening to other people. So we opened our doors officially in 2011. We've been able to free 10 wrongfully convicted people. We've been able to pass some legislation in New York pertaining to videotaping interrogations, identification reform, DNA database expansion. I became an advisory board member of the coalition group It Could Happen to You, which the foundation's part of, and now we co-brand and we just do our policy work together. And we were able to pass some additional laws in New York. So we have passed discovery reform, which pertains to sharing information between the prosecution and defense early on in the process automatically, so that both sides can have access to the same information, as opposed to what was going on before, which was on the eve of hearings or trials, a bunch of documents would be dumped on the defense lawyer's desk, and then that would only pertain to witnesses that the prosecution was going to call. So if they weren't planning on calling anybody and the information wasn't what the prosecutor deemed to be helpful, they would just simply withhold. You know? And so that we changed that. We turned that around, and we passed the Commission on Prosecutor Conduct, so independent oversight board for prosecutors. And then we passed a tweak of that law, and we opened chapters in Pennsylvania and California, the coalition group, using the same model, building statewide coalition, having narrow focus of 1 or 2 issues at a time. And in Pennsylvania, we were able to pass a law pertaining to automatic expungement. So there we had exonerees that were in the peculiar situation of having been exonerated in court, and yet their records hadn't been cleaned. So when they went for job interviews and applied for apartments, they would still have a record, and they would be pointing to media coverage, but people didn't want to hear that. You had a record, and that was that. So I'm going to get into what our agenda is. The primary focus on New York, and I'll mention just for context briefly what's going on in other states. So initially, what we're trying to do is we're trying to recast the Commission on Prosecutor Conduct. So we were able to pass that back in 2018, very strong bipartisan support. We were able to get 5 resolutions from various towns and counties, which we thought would demonstrate the clamor for accountability for prosecutors. So prosecutorial misconduct is a major factor of wrongful conviction, and it runs through virtually all of the wrongful conviction cases. So the prosecutors, in short, the way that things are now, you can't sue them, they have immunity. So they could withhold evidence of your innocence. If they do that after an arrest has been made, then you can't sue them. I tried, I lost. They don't face criminal penalties, and there is no independent oversight body either. So they're basically allowed to run wild, a class of people that are in essence above the law. So what we did was we passed the Commission on Prosecutor Conduct. The District Attorneys Association of New York, not wanting any oversight and arguing that they didn't need any, that prosecutorial misconduct was very rare, that when it did happen, it was happening by rookies, and that we can police ourselves and everything's just fine, thank you. They brought a lawsuit, and they claimed that the commission was unconstitutional per New York State Constitution. And the judge rejected all those arguments. He did find a problem in the appeal procedure. And so the whole statute came down as being unconstitutional. So we're in the process of repassing that using the judge's decision as a landmark. We have passed it in the Assembly. The holdup now is in the Senate. So I want to throw out some bills. On all these, I'm going to be throwing out bills. I'm going to hope the crowd helps me with this later on in terms of reaching out to your elected officials. So we're trying to pass, we need people to call their elected officials. You know, we need the bill S8815. Okay, that's S8815. That's the Commission on Prosecutor Conduct. So we need to have that passed. Right now, the bill is in the Senate rules. We need to get out of rules and go to the floor for a general vote. You know, again, it passed in 2018, overwhelming bipartisan support. We don't quite get why we can't pass it again there, but there seems to be a holdup. Another bill that we're working on is called the Challenging Wrongful Convictions Act. That's the Challenging Wrongful Conviction Act. And so, what this bill would do is the following important things. Okay, so first of all, everybody should know that it's been estimated that about 10% of, well, first of all, about 98% of all cases are end in a plea bargain. Now, out of that, a conservative number that's been estimated by some judges and other people is about 10% of the people who plead guilty are actually innocent. So that's for context. So as the law stands now, if somebody has pled guilty, they're not able to argue actual innocence later. It doesn't matter what evidence that's been previously was withheld or that was uncovered through investigation. You are not allowed, you're procedurally barred from making an actual innocence argument in court. So this bill would fix that. Another thing that this bill would do is it would give people who are filing this post-conviction motion, 440 motion, you'd get a right to counsel. Right now you don't have a right to counsel. And the other major thing that this bill would do is in the event that any illegal act is later legalized, if you're a defendant and you've been convicted, you have a record on that, you could go back to court and try to get your record expunged. So putting some color to that, should New York legalize marijuana, anybody with a marijuana conviction, you know, should not suffer the stigma and collateral consequences of having a record for marijuana possession or smoking. So the bill would allow people. So this bill, I'm going to give you the bill number now. This is S266. Again, the bill number is S266, and the Assembly bill number is A98. It's currently in Senate codes. It's in the Assembly. I want to mention that Assemblyman Dan Court, who's running for Manhattan DA, he's trying to follow on that bill. Now, the next thing we're doing also is what's called the Fair and Timely Parole Act. So that bill is A4346A. That's A4346A, and its Senate bill number is 497A. And so when I went to the parole board, you know, the parole board's decision noted that I had an excellent educational record, that I had a good disciplinary record, that I had some letters of support, including from a prison employee, but nonetheless they were denying me parole in part. Well, first of all, I maintained my innocence rather than expressing remorse and taking responsibility. But the other factor was they cited nature of the crime. So let me get into that for a minute. The nature of the crime is something that's never going to change, right? The facts are, or the charges are, what they were. That was known before the first day in prison was served. So the judge already took that into consideration in forming a sentence. So having the parole board deny an applicant based on nature of the crime alone is the sole reason for denying parole. That in effect resentences people. It's a demoralizing factor. I had prisoners tell me, well, why should I rehabilitate myself, Jeff? Why should I take programs addressing the crime that I committed? Why should I bother educating myself or engage in any of these vocational programs? Because they're not going to parole me anyway. So I saw a lot of prisoners there who go to parole board, be denied parole, appear later 2 years, get denied parole again, and continue to have that happen to them. You know, that happened to me, but fortunately I only did another year out of the 2 I was ordered to serve, and then I was exonerated. But had I not been exonerated, I would have been in that never-ending cycle of perpetuity. In terms of, for the fear-mongers out there, let me say that people who have served really large amounts of time, they have the lowest recidivism rates. In fact, from a prison management point of view, people who are doing life are the easiest managed population because they realize that they have to be there and they want to try to be as comfortable as they can and try to go home as quickly as they can. There's a such thing as aging out of crime. There are a lot of people who, yes, they committed serious crimes, but then again, that's why they were in prison. Then again, that's why they did quite a bit of time in prison. And so, to continue to deny parole of someone who's been rehabilitated for something they did 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years ago, it completely abandons the idea of believing in a second chance and believing in rehabilitation. You know I saw a lot of prisoners there who were elderly, and the prison simply wasn't able to deal with their advanced medical needs. They were literally living on the hospital, located on the prison grounds. They were on a cell block that was for people with other illnesses, that had serious medical issues. Some people were had stuck with dialysis machines, or were bedridden, or literally pushed around in a wheelchair, or hunched over, walking with a cane. These were grandpas. This was somebody's father. It might have been somebody's son at one point. You know, and I saw the parole board decisions for some of them, and it said, well, if you were released, you would not remain at liberty without breaking the law, or your release is incompatible with society's safety. It would have been laughable if it weren't really such serious implications. And I remember talking to people that, they were different people than they were maybe 20 years ago. And I remember thinking, what's the point? What's the point of them doing another 5 years, another 7 years, or continuing to hold them? The only thing that's happening here is, the state's continuing to pay $72,000 a year to hold them, and they're just getting older. There's a lot of formerly incarcerated people that are making meaningful contributions to society now. They're working as teachers, or in justice reform nonprofit sphere like prisoner reentry, or diverting at-risk youth from a life of crime so that they don't end up in prison. And yet, if they were not paroled, like is happening to many other people, then society, we would be the ones who would not be benefiting from that. So the Fair and Timely Parole Act would prevent the parole board from denying parole based solely on nature of the crime. It would force the parole board to actually do their job, determine whether someone really has been rehabilitated or not. Based on their prison record, based on their educational accomplishments, based on other achievements. So again, I want to give the bill number. That was A4346A, and that was Senate Bill 497A. Now, closely related to that, we have the Elder Parole Act. So that bill is S2144. That's S2144, and A9040. On the Assembly side, that's A9040. And backing up to the regular Fair and Timely Parole bill, just for a half second, God forbid your son or daughter does something commits a crime, gets caught, they're incarcerated. Once they've changed, don't you think that they should get a second chance if they've earned it, as opposed to just citing back to what it was they did originally? I think the answer to that should be yes. So the Elder Parole Act what that would do is anybody that has reached the age of 55 who has also served 15 years in prison would get a parole board appearance. They wouldn't guarantee they come home, be paroled, just that they would get an appearance. So again, I go back to the elderly in prison that I saw, and I saw a lot of prisoners there, and sometimes they would apply for compassionate release, which is once there's been a medical determination that they're terminally ill, that they can be released prior to their sentence, so that they can die in freedom, die with a little bit of dignity. They could be around some of their loved ones, and for that little bit of time they have left. And I remember how the system worked, and by the time the decisions came, sometimes people would be dead already, or by the time the decision came, they'd have 1 or 2 days left. Just brutal. I mean, is it just ultimate revenge? Is that what it's about? Is that what it's come down to now? In society, and Governor Cuomo being notoriously stingy when it comes to granting clemency to people, and it's his administration that decides on the compassionate releases as well. So plenty of blame there. We are making a movement to videotape the interrogations from beginning to end. I mentioned earlier that we've already passed the bill on that, but the problem is that the legislation came out watered down. So they made exceptions for various murder charges. They made exceptions for sex offenses. They made exceptions for drug cases. So my rhetorical argument against that is, if the whole theory of videotaping interrogations is to prevent wrongful convictions caused by coerced false confessions, a phenomenon, by the way, that's caused wrongful convictions in 25% of the DNA-proven wrongful convictions, with particularly vulnerable populations as people with mental health issues and youth. If the whole theory of the videotaping from beginning to end is to curtail that, my rhetorical question is, with respect to these exceptions, does that mean in some of these charges that it would be acceptable if we had a wrongful conviction caused by a coerced false confession? Because if the answer is no, I don't understand what the point of all these exceptions are. So we want to close up and close down each and every one of those exceptions. It's spending some money on the front end to save a whole heck of a lot of money on the back end with regards to compensation. And let me tell you, okay, no amount of money is worth being wrongfully imprisoned for, to lose your freedom for. I would be willing to give back each and every penny I got and go the other way. I'll go into debt for that amount of money if I could get back, the 16 years that I did. I didn't graduate high school. I missed the prom. I missed finishing education at a more traditional age, being established in a career, possibly having a family, births, deaths, weddings. All those things were gone from me, and from other people who were wrongfully imprisoned. Some people are wrongfully imprisoned. I remember our first client that we exonerated, William Lopez, and Bill did 23 and a half years. His daughter was a year and a half when he went away, excuse me. And he came back and she was 25. Totally unable to rebuild the relationship, totally unable. They just couldn't reconnect, and his whole adult life was stolen from him. I remember, just to give Bill a tribute here, because we're talking about, fallen comrades in the struggle, and Bill isn't with us anymore. Bill passed after a year and a half of being free. I remember the judge mentioned in his decision, he referred to a deceitful prosecutor, and how the prosecutor claimed that this witness, who's this drug addict who had been up for 24 hours, who had did 12 vials of, I forgot if it was crack or cocaine, and she claimed to be testifying because it was the right thing to do, and then she miraculously walked out of jail the day after he was convicted. Figure that one out, with his own lawyer talking him out of calling his alibi witnesses, and how the initial witnesses described 6'1", 6'2", dark-skinned Panamanian, and Bill was a 5'7", light-skinned Puerto Rican weighing 100 pounds less than what was originally estimated. So his case leapt off the page to us, and I just wanted to just reference Bill as an example, and even I wanted to just reference briefly just the author of the book, The Janine Machine. Just taking a half second just to remember Richard Glassberg, the author of this book, founder of the Westchester Guardian. Wrote the only book ever that was critical, and still is the only book ever written critical about Janine Pirro. And Richard passed away within this last year as well, but doing courageous journalistic work and not afraid to take on the politicians and the powerful, often putting their pictures on the cover of the Westchester Guardian, calling me out. He was a mentor to me. He gave me my first job. He was the editor of the newspaper that he started just a couple of months actually prior to my being released. So in wrapping up, let me just briefly reference the rally, which, by the way, wanted to again express appreciation for Americans for Legal Reform. Just as a group, I consider that what the group is doing, you're doing the family law, the civil law version of what I'm doing and fighting for on the criminal side. And so I do feel a sense of kinship, of solidarity here. And I wanted to thank the group, for its support of the Andre Brown case. Recently we did the rally in the Bronx. And so basically Andre Brown has been incarcerated for the last 22 years on attempted murder. He wasn't even convicted of killing somebody. Imagine for 22 years. And about a year ago, Andre was awarded an evidentiary hearing by the judge. And the judge determined he had enough evidence towards his innocence that he would be entitled to have a hearing, to have the witnesses come in and judge evaluate their credibility. One witness against, this is a two-witness case. So one, and by the way, we should all know that misidentification leading cause of wrongful convictions, and 75% DNA proven wrongful convictions. And so one eyewitness claimed that he was running for his life. Somebody was chasing after him, shooting him, and on his way falling down, he glances over and in 30 seconds gets a look at the witness. Not exactly really good conditions. Second witness claims to have saw the same thing, but on the street where she says, and the location where she says she saw the crime at, she says she was there at a red light. There is no light on that section. There's a stop sign. There is not a light. And so the location that she gives and where the other person gives are two different things. So in that time, Oscar Michelin, an attorney out here, a fellow Long Islander for many of you, been practicing 35 years, exonerated 7 people, working in 3 cases with the Descovich Foundation as an advisory board member, and several other wrongful conviction cases that he's pursuing outside of the foundation. So he's been representing Andre for about 6 years, and he helped to uncover some evidence of Andre's innocence. So he located. I came in the case about 4 or 5 months ago. Oscar asked me to come in and second seat him, and so I've been doing that as my first case. But Oscar was able to uncover evidence of innocence that, first of all, we have, there's another witness who saw a different person, an alternative suspect, commit the crime. This alternative suspect looks exactly like Andre. A gun involved in multiple incidents, which was not known before, also tied to this alternative suspect. And this alternative suspect and the victim had a shootout up, a few days before that, in a turf war. So plenty of evidence there, and yet, because the Bronx District Attorney will not agree to a virtual hearing, Andre has been waiting in prison for the last year, right? 22 overall, out of which the last one, in effect, being held beyond the grasp of the court, because the executive order that Governor Cuomo and the legislature worked out references a post-conviction hearing as something that can be done virtually with the consent of the parties. And so the Bronx DA's office has a very ingenuity type of way of avoiding losing the case, right? Just don't agree to go to court. Just don't agree to go to court. Keep the conviction intact. So we held the rally, you know, just and I remember leading the chant, you know, just day in court, day in court, day in court. That's all we were asking. Just give him a day in court, okay? I don't get that you don't agree with this case in light of everything I mentioned. I don't get how the Bronx DA's office couldn't concede that he's at least allowed to have a new trial with this evidence. I don't get that at all. But putting that aside for a moment, since you believe in the conviction, since you believe in his guilt, or so you claim, why not at least agree to give him his day in court? Cross-examine the witnesses, try to discredit them. You want to put on your own evidence, you can if you want, but give the man his day in court. You know, but they would not do that. They wouldn't agree. So that was the whole point of the rally, is, you know, trying to show the Bronx DA's office that there are people that are, you know, very disturbed, you know, by just this lack of access to the court. But nonetheless, they went ahead and filed their opposition anyway. I did write the reply to their opposition. 80% of what I wrote made the cut. I made arguments like, you know, that his due process rights, and he has a right to access to the court, so that's a violation of due process. Certainly there's a Sixth Amendment implication. If you have the right to confront evidence against, you know, the case against you, your accusers, part of that is being able to present evidence countering the charges, and he's in effect being prevented from that. I referenced how it is Eighth Amendment violation of cruel and unusual punishment, even just to have 1 day in prison for somebody innocent. And so, if that's true, then giving them their day in court, you know, to prevent them from that furthers it. So I made the logical extension argument, you know. But unfortunately, I mean, you know, the judge's hands were kind of tied by the executive order referencing this 440 post-conviction exception, and so we lost the procedural issue. And so now the consequence is, you know, Andre will be stuck in prison indefinitely until the pandemic is over, or at least enough to the point where courts are opening back up. And the same Bronx DA's office is engaging in other cases, other proceedings, agreeing to do it virtually, but not in Andre's case, though. So it's kind of scary to hold people beyond the access of court, and I think everybody here can relate to that. So I guess the point of mentioning all of that is just to give a little bit of color to, and and Gary referenced that prior to my coming up here. In Pennsylvania, our work there, Pennsylvania is one of 15 states that does not offer compensation. So if you're exonerated there, if you can't win a federal lawsuit, which is more than just proving you're wrongfully imprisoned, you have to prove a malicious violation of a constitutional right. And so if the government can prove that they had a reason to think that you were guilty, then you lose automatically. Nothing else matters. So that's the importance of having a compensation law on the books, because people in Pennsylvania, are not being compensated. So we're working that legislation there. We have put the issue on the governor's radar. He did mention it as a priority in his State of the State address. We're working on the oversight of prosecutors there. And lastly, in California, again, the oversight of prosecutors. And we think there's a chance to kill the death penalty out in California. The obvious risk of executing innocent people is our primary argument, but it does certainly not rest exclusively on that. I think I will go on a 30 to 40 second rant. Hopefully Gary doesn't pull the hook here, but I'm going to go on a rant for half a second, on the death penalty. The victim's wife, defendant, is much more likely to receive the death penalty that way. So there's a type of devaluing of human life there. There's a socioeconomic issue. I have yet to see anybody rich get sentenced to death, much less executed. They can, the death penalty simply isn't sought in those cases. And they also are in position to hire high-quality lawyers, investigators, experts, and mount a vigorous defense. It's kind of arbitrary, the decision to seek the death penalty or not. Is motivated by the personal politics of the district attorney there, whether they're looking to use a case like that to further their political career. So there's some of that. Some crime victims are, say that the increased publicity of these cases helps. It reopens painful wounds, and it really doesn't help them heal. So there's that. There's the fiscal argument. In these difficult financial times caused by the COVID, capital cases are very expensive. So I'm happy to have participated in warding off punishment here in New York when there was that big effort in 2007. Speaking of the pandemic, I talked about the elderly in prison and the parole reform. Those are pandemic issues also. We need to let as many people out of prison as we can safely. Okay? People have been rehabilitated, and we keep people in when past they're rehabilitated, or we return people back to prison for technical violations, silly things like you're supposed to be inside at 8 o'clock and you got there at 10, or you didn't tell the parole officer of your change of address. Yeah, there are rules. There should be consequences if they're broken. I don't think the answer is return somebody back to prison for a year or two at $72,000 a year, rather than say something like community service or some other penalty. We still have people over sentenced in prison, sentenced under drug laws. I saw people walking around that had more time in prison for drug possession than other people that I knew that killed people. I mean, that was backwards to me. And I saw people there that were, non-violent offenders. And just to be sure, so that everybody can understand, I'm a middle-of-the-road type of person, I did see some people there that I would not want to see back out on the street. But that was based upon how they were continuing to conduct themselves while there. So, that's really the span of my advocacy work and what's going on in the court. And I think the Andre Brown case is a really dangerous precedent. There is a role for county elected officials in all these reforms. Resolutions could be passed calling for the passage of these state bills that did work in 2018. So there's that. Counties can also enact certain things themselves. The county legislature, for example, could pass a law that in Suffolk County, for example, that all of our police entities within all of our state police entities, not state police, but as in the county, okay? No, they all are going to videotape interrogations. Even if there's all these Swiss cheese examples statewide, in our county right here, we're not doing that. Okay, it's going to be videotaped. We're going to preserve evidence. So there are resolutions. There are these laws that can, in fact, be enacted. And in the ultimate analysis, all these things are about accuracy. They're about justice. They're about fairness. I personally do not support the idea of defunding the police. I want the cop to answer 911. I don't want to go on hold. I don't want a social worker showing up to a crime scene. I want an armed law enforcement officer. But I want somebody there who has received training with regards to dealing with people in mental health crisis. I'm sick and tired of seeing brutality and unjustifiable deadly police force. I'm tired of seeing cops get away with killing people on camera. And we did just the qualified immunity law was just passed, so there will be more holding of police officers accountable. At the same time, when warranted, we need to support the police, and when it's warranted, we need to be critical of them. So I don't think there's anything magical about the uniform where everyone that wears it is suddenly good. It's not a few bad apples. It's a hell of a lot more than that, or we wouldn't have these issues. At the same time, I think that we do have some professional officers who do their best. And look, doing your best means not looking the other way, blowing the whistle. You like to tell the crowd, you see something, say something. Well, if you see your coworker doing something illegal, you see something, say something. Blow the whistle, because if you want to be the law enforcement, you want to be the lawbreaker, because when one crosses over to the next, it's it's not that far away from there to having anarchy. You know, I think the badge and the gun are awesome responsibilities, and they're there to carry out a really difficult job that takes a lot of courage and is life risky. But if you abuse that, then to me that's far worse than if someone who doesn't have the uniform were to do something equal to that. So those are my views. I carry that message. I'll open for questions in a minute. And I have worked doing co-teaching ethics in police academies for the last 6 years in New Jersey. I served on the Peekskill Police Task Force Reform Group. We issued a report that was accepted by the City Council recommendations on policing, doing that collaboratively with the Peekskill Police Chief and County Police Chief and retired officer there. So I do get buy-in from law enforcement. I did serve on the transition team for the incoming Westchester District Attorney's Office, preparing a series of recommendations for their conviction review unit. I do say to you, it's very important who holds each position. Vote in candidates that are for justice reform, regardless of party, and vote out those who are on the way. Don't you dare go and get out of jury duty. If you do that, the only people that are going to be left to serve on juries are people that are not going to be critical, that are not going to hold the prosecution to their burden of proof. So get on the jury, be critical. If they don't prove it, you know what to do. On the other hand, if they do prove it, I don't advocate for somebody getting away with crimes either. In a lot of ways, I was victimized by somebody who committed a crime. He killed the victim in my case, he killed a second woman, and he was content with me doing time for his crime. So I'm no fan of people getting away with crimes either. So that's that's my message, and I hope I haven't spoken for too long. And I'll open up for questions in the back, and I do appreciate everybody coming out. In the back.
That was unbelievable. You said S2144, that's the Elder Parole Act?
Correct.
What was the age of that? 50 or
55. It's 50. Yeah, it's 55 is the age, and also having served 15 years in prison.
That was the part I
Yeah,
didn't
15 and 55. Right.
You can still go to jail, so you're not clear.
In the front.
Jeff,
Any questions?
like those two kids who actually killed, how should that be handled? And
Yeah. So I mean, I don't. Well, I'm not familiar with that case in particular. I'll give some general guidelines. Right. That's the best that I can do since I haven't. I'm not familiar with that case in particular. But look, I don't agree with charging kids as adults. Right. Your brain's not fully formed. You're more spontaneous, spur of the moment, reckless. More easily influenced. There's peer pressure involved. So I don't agree with charging them as adults and giving them adult sentences. I mean, I certainly wouldn't advocate for them getting away with crimes either. And another thing, I don't think that adults should, a kid should be housed with adults. I mean, probably maybe the cutoff point separation-wise should maybe be 23, 24. Yeah, so I mean, that would be what I have to offer on that. I know it's not the complete picture, but look, I've thought about the issues a lot in general. I have a master's degree, and my master's thesis is on lawful conviction, cause and reform, but I definitely don't have all of the answers. You need that? You. Yes.
This is a two-part question.
Yep.
First of all, I after all that you've been through, knowing the corruption and the injustice of the courts, what made you want to become an attorney? And with that, what made you think that you can turn around what they put you through? My second part question is, with all the abuse that
Sure, sure. And I do agree with your premise, by the way, when you mentioned, you know, in a lot of ways, the people here tonight and similarly situated people are in effect serving time and wages on the outside, you know, with the issues that you talk about. So I do agree with your analogy. So I'll deal with the second part of the question first. In terms of how do I get some type of healing? So I make sense of everything that happened to me by looking at it in a kaleidoscopic type of way. So I believe my purpose in the world is to fight wrongful conviction and fight for justice reform. So I look at it that way. It allows me to not lose my mind even now. I do get a lot of meaning. It's healing. It's cathartic. I do believe I'm making a difference, and I need to make my suffering count for something. So, hence doing the work. And maybe another part of that question implied is a related matter of, well, how come you're not angry? Well, I want to enjoy my life as much as I can, and I can't do that if I'm angry or bitter. It's not like if I was angry or bitter, I would be impacting the people that did what they did to me. I feel like I've lost so much as is. Why would I want to, in effect, lose the rest of my life? So all of those are different lines of reasoning that I go down in terms of healing and anger. And what did you want to ask a follow-up? I know I didn't get to your first question.
Yeah, so basically, it was, you're basing your healing technique, you're saying it's logical. I mean, did you have some sort of spirit, you have, you know,
Yes.
did you go to therapy?
Yes, I went to therapy. I went 4 times a week for 6 years. So I did do some therapy, and I believe that when people go through traumatic things, there's really 2 outcomes that can break you. The second thing is you can rise above it, elevate, and have a higher moral conscience. And I've been fortunate, for whatever reason, to go the latter route. I feel very fortunate to have had educational opportunities that many other people in my position haven't had, and so I do feel a strong moral obligation to do everything that I can. I remember being frustrated when I would read about people that were exonerated and they would go home and they'd get their initial 5 minutes of fame, and you know, you'd never hear from them again. You know, and I would think, well, why aren't you talking about wrongful convictions? Why aren't you keeping it going? Why aren't you trying to open this thing up a little bit for those of us that left behind? So when I found myself in this position unexpectedly, and I kind of drafted myself, and I think to myself, you know, well, you were critical of other people, so what are you going to do now? Are you going to show them how it's done, or are you going to go the same way? So there's that aspect to it. I do feel like there is a universal lesson that goes beyond wrongful conviction. So, you know, I could see someone who's been wronged by the civil system becoming an attorney, for example, and helping other people that way, or fighting on a policy level. You know, I could see those things as applying in this setting or other walks of life. So I do think that there's something healing in that, living a purpose-driven life. In terms of what makes me think I can turn this thing around and become a lawyer, so dealing with that facet of it for a minute. So I kind of got frustrated with sitting in the front row of the courtroom, even if I was the boss of the lawyer, or were colleagues and we collaborated on a case. At the end of the day, I couldn't sit at the defense table. I couldn't make any of the arguments to the judge. I couldn't represent any of the people. So that was what motivated me to go to law school. I feel like it's empowering as well. It's opened a lot of doors. I feel like it adds to my credibility. So a way of being a more effective advocate. And beyond the representation, I think it helps in terms of pushing policy points. I mean, people can't metaphorically look down on me no more. Yeah, okay, that's nice, Jeff. Okay, and I get what happened. We're lawyers, okay? We're lawyers. We understand this at a level way above. Well, no, hold on. I got a law license. I'm just like you, except I have a master's and you probably don't. And I went through the system and I saw it. So actually, I'm the one in the advantage here in this. So that was another element of that. And And I do feel like a lot of doors have opened up for me that wouldn't have been the case otherwise. So that was why I decided to try to, turn that around. And really the thing that tipped the balance, because I really had been having this debate in my mind for 2 or 3 years. Do I want to go to law school? Do I want to spend 3 long, hard years doing this in the field, doing the advocacy? That's where the real work is at, not being in court, not being tied to, chained to a law school class and learning about property rights and things that have no relevance at all whatsoever to what I'm doing. But I remember that I was there at the Judicial Institute, which ironically was located physically on the Pace Law School campus. And so I was there and I was giving a lecture to a bunch of judges there. They had asked me to come and address a couple of wrongful conviction related legal topics. And afterwards I was chit-chatting with the judge in the hallway, and she said, Jeff, you know this topic better than some lawyers, even better than some of us judges. Otherwise, there's no point in having you come here. Why don't you go to law school and just get the piece of paper, just get the credential? And that kind of ended the internal debate in my own mind of whether to go to law school or not. But I'm only interested in using the degree with respect to wrongful conviction cases, exonerating people, the compensation on the back end. I do advocate for additional policy reforms like I talked about tonight, and things like solitary confinement and mass incarceration, and other topics that I've addressed, pushing the policy issues. But that's the limited extent that I'm looking really to use the law degree.
My question is, I guess you don't know anything about this. 1984, Lehigh Valley, convicted of murder of a mother and a baby, and she's doing 20 years for being wrongfully convicted, yes.
Yeah, no, I'm not familiar with that one, but look, we can talk offline, give a little bit of advice.
One of the things you mentioned just really quick was about solitary confinement. You brushed right over it.
Yes.
I think people here, I was shocked. I mean, I knew you for years, and I once asked you about solitary confinement. You spent how many months?
I spent 28 days. I went to solitary once, and let me just put a little color to that. I went to solitary confinement because I was preemptively defending myself against 4 prisoners who were coming to stab me, because so far as they were concerned, I was a rapist. Okay, and so I didn't wait for them to. I didn't know how many of the 4 were gonna come. They were gonna use weapons. I thought they were gonna, stab me. So I took the battle to them, and I'm not a fighter. Okay, I did the best that I could, and I damn near got killed for my efforts. Okay, and on top of that, I got sent to the solitary confinement for 28 days. In connection with that, I got hit multiple times in the side of my head with a 10-pound weight plate. The camera can see I have scars on my hands. Here. So, but moving past that, that's just context. What I ended up there for. But to get into solitary confinement a little bit, I consider it to be torture. There was just a bill now passed. Actually, the governor signed into law which prevents people with mental health issues, youth from going into solitary confinement, and it can't be longer than 15 days consecutively. I mean, some people live there months, years, sometimes a decade would be given out, if you can believe that. In terms of the conditions on solitary confinement, you're kept in the cell 23 hours a day. Anytime you leave the cell, they put you in handcuffs. So if you're going to take a shower, if you're going to the recreation, which is by yourself. The recreation is a small caged area. They have a roof similar to Gary's Tiki Bar here. You can't see the sky, and you're there by yourself. And after a while, I really disliked being in handcuffs. And the aggravation wasn't worth going. So they'd come and ask me, "You going to recreation?" And I would tell them no, and I would stay in the cell. They're supposed to send mental health workers around to check in mentally. But there's no confidentiality. The experts are speaking to you outside your cell in front of the other prisoners there, so there's no confidentiality there. The lights are on 24 hours a day. You can't control the lights. There is no clock. The only way I had an idea of what time of day that it was if there were breakfast items on the food tray. You couldn't go to a store, what they call a commissary. You just totally depended on the food that they gave you. The guards were in charge of that, and if you weren't already awake, if you were asleep, and they passed by your cell, I mean, it happened to me. I was sleeping when they passed by my cell. They were feeding the prisoner on the cell next to me, and they refused to feed me. And they said, next time be awake. Next time be awake on time. Have very little property in your cell, very limited access to books. Your cosmetics are locked up literally in they're locked up like in a space in almost like I'm trying to describe what it is. It's like a medicine chest with no mirror, and has your name on it. But stuff like your deodorant, your shampoo, you get to have those when you go to take a shower. You don't have access to that, on a daily basis. Solitary confinement has been proven to cause mental health issues. It's been proven to exasperate pre-existing conditions. So, I did spend time in solitary confinement. I appreciate the question.
Yeah, because I think the question that and Dolores is asking is a lot of people here, nothing like what you're going through, but nonetheless, losing your kids. A lot of us here have been, I want to say wrongfully convicted, but in the family court offense, accused of things that we didn't do, because that's a tactic in court. And I know for me, I was pissed off. I was angry. Even still, I won't say I'm over it, but Judge Mary Minotti. I mean, I do have anger towards her, my ex-wife. And until I met you, and I don't know if you probably don't remember, that was one of the first questions when we were alone that I asked her. I said, "How are you not pissed off at everybody?" And you said, "Well, they already took away all this." Not the same thing you said tonight, but yeah, I know it's easy to say, but I just said if Jeff can do it and forgive. In fact, I don't know if you want to tell the story about the person who's responsible for you being in prison, because he did it when he was on trial and they were mistreating him. You advocated for him. And I said, "Man, how do you find this in yourself to do it?" And I said, "It's not easy, believe me. If you can do it, though, I can do it, because a lot less happened to me." And what Jeff did was turn something. We all have, a lot of us have post-traumatic stress disorder. It's this is common. If you don't, there's something wrong with you if you go through the system and don't. But the thing is to turn it into post-traumatic growth. And Jeff is like the perfect example. There's other people here too. I think, Carlos Rivera has been doing that, and, learning about the system and trying to help people. Frank Vetro is here. He went through it and he wrote his book. I don't want to miss it. Of course, Carl Lancezera is the ultimate example, right? He went through a horrible case and he started Americans for Legal Reform, and he's been giving people a hard time for 30 years. So, but it's something. It's a switch. I think you have to make a conscious effort to say, I'm not going to let this. Because, like you said, what does it do? If it destroys you, the judge wins. And I've told people, listen, the judge won. Don't let them win. If that's what. For me, I'm not going to let them win. I don't want my wife to. My wife wanted to destroy me, destroy my life. And yes, she took away my money. She took away my kids. Took away my career. And then I said, you know what? Fuck all of them. I'm going to start all over again. And with Carl, but it took actually Carl telling me, listen, you got to do it. Carl Lancezera rebuilt his career after his divorce. Carl Ross never lost everything, but I said, I'm going to rebuild it. And believe me, it was hard. Nothing like you going through law school, right? I think we all have to try to turn this into something positive and grow from the experience. And I think talking about the people at the beginning who have passed, life's too short. Make a difference in this world, like Jeff has done, and so many. Make a difference in the world and try to better yourself. I don't know if you can see through the lights, but is that Frank Vetro over there?
Hey, buddy.
Yes.
The V Train.
Hey, Jeff, test my logic here. So you were talking about the bill on prosecuting misconduct before?
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to go with the group to Albany, and I just want to highlight the nonsense, the baseless, hollow arguments the DAs use that you pointed out. One of them being only rookies make mistakes, but how often or whenever is somebody just out of college becoming an assistant DA assigned a murder case?
Right.
That's number one. Again, maybe I'm.
No,
looking
you're-
at-
you're correct, you're
well,
correct.
Maybe I'm looking at the big picture wrong,
No,
because,
yeah.
which would mean that the veterans are doing it, how are the young ones learning? Through the veterans, so the system isn't broken, it's working exactly where they want it to work.
And I want to build on Frank's points, which I agree with them, and I want to mention that it tends to be serial violators. People don't tend to do it once and then keep going in terms of misconduct. There is another analogy between what I'm doing and what Americans for Legal Reform is doing. Often in the course of unapplicable divorces, people are falsely accused. They are arrested for things as a divorce tactic, and I know a lot of people. In fact, Gary, as I understand it, you've told me many times you were arrested no fewer than 11 times. Never actually convicted, but arrested 11 times. So there is the spillover, crossover into that. In terms of, but look, in all of this, and I don't want to be too long either, but in terms of the story Gary was mentioning, so I'm in federal court, and we have the actual perpetrator there, and doing deposition, and the context is it's within my civil rights lawsuit. So, my lawyer's trying to prove the cops gave this part of their coercion that they gave me details of the crime, because my confession mirrored their theories as to how the crime happened. So my lawyer's idea was, well, let's call the actual perpetrator, have him testify to how he committed the crime, and that'll help to make that case. So it's getting ready to be lunchtime, and one of my lawyers says to me, he elbows me and looks at me all conspiratorial, and he says they're going to burn him. What do you mean? They're not. They're not going to give him any. They're not going to give him. They're not going to give him anything to eat. And I said, what do you mean you're not going to give him anything to eat? And so he says, F him. He killed 2 people, and he was content for you to do time for your crime. And I said, no. That's why he's in prison. He's lost his freedom as a result of that. That's his punishment. It's not his punishment to be mistreated while he was in prison. And so I got one last pushback. Why do you care? I said, look, dehumanization is not an option. Okay, he's eating. You're going to make sure he eats. And if you don't make sure he eats by asking him, I am. And I'm going to make a really big to-do of all of this if he doesn't eat. So I made sure that he ate. And as a human being, that was my proudest moment. Dehumanization is definitely not an option.
Dorothy has a question in the back. We can't see through the light.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. It was amazing presentation. My question is two parts. One is, could you expand upon the DNA project work that you've done? And second, are you familiar with the John Whitlow case in which he was accused of heinous crimes, rape, and murder of 2 women in Suffolk County? Is that a case that might be presented to the Innocence Project because there are allegations that the DNA was tampered with?
So what was the first part of your question?
Yes, can you talk to us about your DNA project?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so the Innocence Project, they take cases only where there's where DNA is available. That's just for context. That's only available in 5 to 12% of all serious felony cases. So at my foundation, we take both DNA and non-DNA cases. So there's actually 4 times the amount of exoneration, non-DNA exoneration compared to DNA exoneration. So those cases can be won. Only one of our cases actually involves, well, actually 2 of our cases, out of our 10 active cases now that we're doing involves DNA. Look, DNA is the gold standard of evidence. I mean, that said, that assumes that all the proper protocols are followed by the lab out in Long Island. There's been problems with the crime lab out here. I think that's well publicized. is a case that the Innocence Project would look at. I mean, making sure all the proper protocols were followed, retesting DNA, all that stuff is very, is very important. Nationally, 3 people have been wrongfully convicted based on positive DNA test results that were later disputed through further DNA testing. So, in a wrongful conviction case involving a DNA match, I mean, doing a retesting of the DNA, along with determining whether there's been any problems in the lab that have been uncovered to date, are kind of standard techniques to look at. In terms of wrongful conviction overall, in Long Island, I mean, this is the Marty Tankleff case from Suffolk, and Nassau County residents might remember the John Kogut and his house, the John Restivo case, when people were exonerated through DNA testing in a Nassau County wrongful conviction. But there's been other wrongful conviction cases out here as well. There is a conviction review unit out here in the Suffolk County DA's office. Jury is still out in terms of whether that's going to be a real unit or not. I guess time will tell. I haven't heard about that specific case, but I think that he should apply to the Innocence Project for that. By the way, and all the Innocence organizations, the applicants themselves have to apply. They don't, not their friends, family, or advocates. So I just want to give that as a tip. Just a short few sentences to asking you to fill out a questionnaire. People often write long letters. That's really not going to matter. You're going to be sent the same questionnaire. You have to fill out the questionnaire, and then dialogue will happen that way. Nothing is decided one way or another by the initial letter. Another thing I advocate for is people putting together like a really super short letter. My name is such and such. I'm wrongfully convicted of this crime, sentenced to this much time. Evidence against me was this. Here's what's flawed in the evidence. Reference the 3 best facts that support their evidence, and then change gears. If there's any directions to go in that could possibly lead to new evidence, reference that, because anyone looking at these cases, we're looking for, can we believe in the innocence claim? Do we see a route to victory? If the answer is no, that's it. So just those top 2 or 3 facts in the record. Then the reason I'm writing you is I'm not able to afford representation. I'd like you to consider taking my case pro bono. So that's short, to the point, non-detail oriented, not soft peddling, not more than 2 paragraphs. The more you write, the less likely you are to get any help. Do not send unsolicited documents. Remember, no one's invested in your case other than you until people become invested. So if you make people want to run, but it's too much, that's what's going to happen. But all you want as in that initial letter, and I advocate for that letter to be written and then sprayed around large firm, pro bono, mid-size, small, solo practitioners that reference pro bono, and then start the same thing places that don't reference it, they do pro bono. You want to throw as many irons out there as you can. You don't want to send unsolicited documents, and you need to keep the letter short. All you want somebody to think after they've read that letter, and I've written hundreds of them, and I've read hundreds of them on both ends. All you want, as far as the thought in someone's mind to be when they're done, you want them to think to themselves, well, yeah, if what Gary just told me about his case is true, then maybe he might be innocent. Let me learn a little bit more about this in cases that earn time as it goes. That's the process. So that's the best advice I can give.
Somebody asked Jeff before about what makes him do it and the difference that he's making. And I just want to say, like speaking to this group, we have a lot of people on this three different Facebook. You never know who you're going to touch that's going to make the difference. And people have said to me, if anybody asks me to go on a radio show or a podcast, I say yes. I don't care if there's 5 people listening, because it only takes one.
Exactly.
And you talk about the people that you touch throughout your life. And I know one example is when Jeff went to the Innocence Project, one of the women who read his letter, who wasn't an attorney, she was a clerk or a secretary, intake, read the story and became invested in Jeff's case and followed him through his innocence, and decided because of that, she became a lawyer too. and now she's helping people. So, you know, just the spark that you touch, and I always say, listen, this, I don't know what's going to change our family law system. I think it's going to take somebody famous being screwed that has a lot of money, you know, a big figure, because they don't care about us. But who knows what it's going to be? And tell your story as much as you can. I mean, Jeff didn't have to come out to Long Island because he hates our traffic out here. But, you know, he slept out in the afternoon and had to put on a suit and tie for us because he wants to make a difference. And who knows which one of us is going to be the one that's going to change the system. Things do change. They move slow. But, you know, I mean, look at the case that's going on now, you know, in the news. You know, I'm drawing a blank on his name, the guy who got killed by the cop.
Oh, George Floyd.
George Floyd. I mean, look at the difference. He didn't choose to make the difference, but look at the difference his case has made, you know, in the world. So you just never know what it's going to be, who's going to listen, and we should all try to do our best to tell the story and make a difference. It could be, you know, it could be Stephen Becker, who's here tonight running for office, and he heard Jeff's story, and when he becomes a legislator, he says, you know what, I'm going to listen to what Jeff said, because he would have never heard his story if he wasn't here tonight. He had to sit here for 2 hours and listen to it, right? But so being exposed to it, Jeff really tells his story, I think, wherever he can. In fact, Carlos is doing his podcast, House Calls with Dr. Carlos, letting people tell their story. And Jeff, I know we had Jeff as a guest,
Yes.
and he says, Gary, you're not going to believe it. Jeff said, give me a 5-minute warning. And I started talking to him, and I realized he was in Hawaii in a 12-hour time difference, and he got up at like 3 in the morning
Yes.
on a vacation to tell you, you don't
Yes.
need to do that, but you did it. Thank you for doing that. So, you know, these are all things that make a difference and make you who you are, which is why, you know, we're all brothers in solidarity here.
Absolutely. I think there's another question here.
Hi, Jeff. I'm Jim Kelly, and I've got a question about cameras in court. Of course, excluding the situation where courts are closed when you can't broadcast there, and the civil rights law of Section 52. For due process purposes, how do you feel about a litigant, a defendant, getting a video recording of the court proceedings for their own purposes, regardless of whether or not it's broadcast or not?
Yeah, I completely favor the idea. I mean, the courts are supposed to be transparent. There's supposed to be a record of the proceedings. That's the whole theory of having stenographers. But really, having a camera record everything that's said and done accomplishes the same purpose as the stenographer, only on a much higher level. So I'm all in favor of it. Look, if the courts aren't afraid to do it, you know, why should they be afraid to be recorded? And why, as victims of the system, why should we be afraid to talk about what's happened to us? If they're not afraid to do it, we shouldn't be afraid to expose it. I think the camera in the courtroom is the best way of doing that. You know, they say the sunlight is a big disinfectant. So I completely support that idea, 100%.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Okay?
Having been falsely accused, convicted, incarcerated, having had that horrible experience, I have a unusual perspective that most people don't have. So I was wondering what your perspective about privatization of prisons is.
Yeah, sure. I've written about this topic before. I completely oppose the idea of prison privatization. To me, it's unethical to try to make a profit off of incarcerating people. Prison for a profit is going to, like any other business, is going to be driven by the bottom line and trying to make money, and that's going to involve trying to cut costs. In the process of cutting costs, state constitutional rights, federal constitutional rights, medical, there's going to be cuts in all kind of areas. It's not as rigorous to be hired. The guards are not prohibited from striking in a private prison situation, literally walking off the job. They're allowed. There's no law preventing them from doing that. There is a law preventing correction officers from doing that. There are higher escapes in terms of frequency that happen in a private prison setting as opposed to state prison. So for all of those reasons, you know, I oppose private prisons. There was a question somewhere over there.
So your story about the interrogation and everything went through at 15 years old probably was in my eyes, the corruption and the way the police treated you, that type of illegal activity. Were these cops ever found wrongful in their actions, or was that just you were something and then you were? Was it just covered up, or was it ever investigated?
Well, it was never investigated. That was just through the lawsuit and the compensation. They never faced any criminal penalties, and they were never fired. They didn't lose their pension. And although the municipalities that they worked for ultimately had to pay the financial compensation, none of the money came out of their pockets. One of the most troublesome things to me was that the lieutenant that oversaw everything became the police chief in Peekskill, based in Clark on my case. And even after I emerged, exonerated, filed a lawsuit, his role was clear. They stayed with him as the police chief for the next 6 to 7 years, allowing him to retire.
No apology.
No apologies.
So what I would like to know, interested in, is with corruption. I've been outspoken. I retired from the New York City Police Department as a sergeant, 27 years, and my focus, I am really disgusted by corruption. I'm disgusted by wrongful behavior by bad cops. Gives all the good cops a horrible name. I've spoken up at a couple legislature meetings, and I did speak about Doc Spencer, and why he still feels that, he's gonna sit on the legislature and pretend that he should be charged with serious crimes during an Operation Sting operation, and us women here, you see, us women, we have been trying to stand up. We went to the Smithtown Fire Department to stand up for a flag on that fire truck. If anyone's from Smithtown, you know what I'm talking about? It was all over the news. It was that flag, two officers that were executed in New York City, that flag still flag. There's outside groups, agitators, the Black Lives Matter, Antifa, they come into our communities, and we've had enough. I know this has nothing to do with the stories you're telling me, but I'm on the back the blue, but at the same time, we want the same people in our communities, Suffolk County, Nassau, to start doing their job. And they're not doing their job. I spoke up at the police reform, 2 meetings. I said they do need police reform out here. I myself experienced a bad encounter with an officer which needed an IV investigation, and they just tossed it out the window. Everybody's saying we need to get answers about how we want to back our community, but yet these outsiders, the Antifas, come in and they want to control our neighborhoods. We were just in Nassau this last weekend. Small business, a pizzeria. They were trying to shut him down because his driver a delivery driver had said something in text, Black Lives Matter, but just not yours. And this group decided to go full force and destroy his business. And with that, the owner immediately fired him, offered to pay for his food, and apologized. Over and over, profusely apologized. They still went to this location. We went out in full force to give our support to this pizza place. And they were allowed to agitate the community. They were allowed to riot. We were being threatened that we'll get arrested if we block the sidewalk. I felt, and they knew I was retired, I felt more disrespected because they knew what I was standing for, and you couldn't question them. The same in Smithtown with the fire department. They gave us this much space with 200 of us, and then they came and took the whole roadway. The police succumbed to the Antifas in our community, and we just want a voice, and we want something done about what happens with the police. If they don't want to help us, who are they helping? This is our community, not theirs. They come from outside, and they're all, I have all the backgrounds, all have criminal backgrounds, and they succumb to them. They let them run the show. They come in, they cause violence, and again, we're the ones being threatened to be arrested. I was terrified that I was going to be handcuffed this last Saturday. We all was, but we were forced off the sidewalk. We were told we couldn't stand in front of the location, which was private property, and they allowed them to stand on the sidewalk at the very location we were first to protest in front of this pizzeria with the Black Lives Matter flag. And if anybody here doesn't understand the difference between BLM and the real Black Lives That Matter, it's not this organization. It's their Antifa. They want to take over our communities. And we've been speaking out, but yet our own police that we back are succumbing, and they're not back, they don't help us. They're not helping
We got
us.
their back, but they don't have ours.
No.
And we get harassed by the police. We, who are backing them, get harassed by them. Threatened with being arrested. If you step off the curb, you're gonna be arrested. Meanwhile, these radical militant sons of bitches are all over the street because the cops have no balls to deal with that. They know we're not gonna give them any trouble. But the ones that will give them trouble, they let them have carte blanche. And I'm done with that.
We feel like we can't fight, we can't go out and speak and defend things that are right. They called that flag, the blue line flag, racist. It was the most ridiculous thing they were trying to accomplish. It's not a racist flag, and they were being hurt because the police force out here in Suffolk decided to allow them to have their forum and silence us. And they stole one of our flags, and that was called a robbery, by the way. Guy had a knife in his hand. His name is Brandon. He had a knife in his hand. The woman came over and said, "That's my flag. What are you doing?" It was pinned up on the pole, and she got so scared she ran off and went to the police and said, "Hey, that guy's right there has my flag." And the captain did nothing. She said, "Oh, that's abandoned property," which it's not. There was ownership right there. And they got rid of the knife. I don't know what they did with the knife. But could you imagine if
We're
this
gonna have to cut you only because people started to leave, so I don't want to cut everybody
Yes.
short. But what we do is, you guys want to come back? Unfortunately, this is our last meeting, so if you want to come to you're all welcome to the barbecue that we have in the summer. Jeff will be there, even though he hasn't committed yet, but he likes to come have a good time. So Jeff at the barbecue, and I'd like to let you guys speak at our first meeting back in September, though. Then we can have the whole thing, because I want to give Jeff a chance to mingle. One last question we're going to do with Jim Fiegel.
Hi, my name's Jim Fiegel. It's basically a comment. First of all, I want to thank you for coming here tonight. You mentioned before whether criminal or family court, injustice is injustice.
Yes.
What's intriguing to me, and what I'm taking away from here, is how you went and carried on. Because there's circumstances that was mentioned with family court that are just unbearable in the heart. And hearing what you've been through, it's just that the example that you are showing, I'm walking away with here that, hey, listen, things happen and it's injustices, but how am I going to deal with this? You could have simply rolled over. You could have got mad. You could have turned to different, and I appreciate that. So you touched somebody tonight.
So just to end the meeting, we have the hero here that was donated again by House of Bagels in Comac. Ed Keller is one of our board members, and Dave McPhee, one of the owners. And really appreciate that they donated all this great food. They're always very supportive. When they heard Jeff was speaking, they did that. Empanadas are gone. Thanks to the Lord.
They were good.
Also, don't forget Steve Becker is here, who's running. And if you have any questions, great time to speak with him. And if you want to get involved, as Jeff knows, even doing everything he's doing, he still gets involved politically when he gets a candidate. that he supports, and again, doesn't matter what party it is. Believe me, I've been screwed by Democrats, Republicans, I used to think, oh, it's the Democrats who suck, and then I had a bad Democrat judge. It's the Republican. It doesn't matter when they become a bad judge or a bad cop; they're just bad. So support whatever party. You know, it's not the national party ticket. It doesn't matter about abortion. It doesn't matter about illegal aliens. Locally is what, when we're voting locally, it doesn't matter what party. It's if they do the right thing. So help yourself to some of the heroes. Go speak to Steve if you'd like to. If you're locally, you'd like to speak to these ladies about what's going on with the pizzeria and all the protests here, or you can speak to Jeff too. Thanks again, Jeff.
If you wanna sign,
And if anybody wants to sign in also, being again that we're a nonprofit, it's good that we have the people that were here
We'll keep
sign
you
in.
on
and
email.
And you can get added to our email list. And Carl can give you misinformation the next time we have a meeting.
I bought the book How Not to Forget Things.
Okay,
Got it?
I can't find it.